Hello everybody, I am Shoptarshi. Welcome to my channel where we are going to take a look at how I made this social media banner image for myself. I did have a social media banner before which looks kind of like this. Not kind of, it looks exactly like this. But I wanted it to look a little bit more interesting and I wanted it to be dark mode because I've been experimenting with having dark scenes lately. And I think I really like that particular style. So I wanted my banner to have a bit more of my signature to it. And this is basically, the banner is basically two files that is based on the logo looping, the seamlessly looping logo animation file that I showed off in the first video on the channel. And I will leave a link to that video in the description below so you can go check that out, because I'm not going to repeat every single thing in that video. I'm just going to show you what I changed to get these files looking the way they look. One thing you will notice is that the camera angle, if you watch that video, one thing you will notice is that the camera angle is different. This is much more cinematic kind of an angle. I like this angle. I don't know whether you'd call this cinematic or not. I just think it looks nice. So it looks a lot nicer than just the standard top-down view. The camera is, it's still a 24mm camera. I don't think, actually no. I think the camera, the previous camera was a 50mm camera, right? The camera that is looking top-down is 50mm. The second camera is a 24mm camera. And I used a 24mm camera because I wanted to get that. If you look at this, it looks very wide. I could also have used an 85mm camera, but then this is like way too tight. This is way too tight. Then I'd have to zoom out and then it would look a lot more isometric. I wanted it to have that perspective feel to it. So I went with a 24mm camera. Another thing you'll notice is that I have these grids. This is the golden ratio grid, composition guide, not grid, composition guide. And keeping your logo or your subject in the center box, that pretty much guarantees that your subject is not going to be cropped when you put it on a social media banner. The YouTube banner in particular is very bad about cropping things really tight and like just removing a lot of the top and a lot of the bottom of the image. So this is the best way to ensure that. That is why this guide is here. The file is basically the same file as the one that you will see in the previous video that I have linked in the description. I just saved it as a different file, and then all I did, you will notice that these lines are not the same blue, and instead of white, this is black. That's basically what I did to get the dark mode. I changed the white to the black, and I changed this from that nice vibrant blueprint blue to this kind of a color. This is more of a desaturated kind of a light bluish white kind of a color. And then the minor lines are a little darker because I wanted the minor lines to be just visible but not take up too much of the attention, right? And the same thing with the circles and the circles here. The other thing you will notice is this thing. So if I disable this, you will notice that the entire grid is way too bright, and I wanted the focus to be on the center. So I took a gradient texture that is mapped to as a spherical gradient modulated by a color ramp and mapped to the object coordinates of the S. That is what this is. And that basically gives you this gradient. And this is not a completely black and white gradient. This is a B-spline. So I just adjusted the dark slider a little bit to make sure that the fall off is not like very harsh. Or I think if you do this, it just becomes like, yeah, it becomes too bright. So I just made sure that there was a bit of a soft fall off. And the reason this is not black is because I wanted these lines to be at least somewhat visible. The reason for that is that this is also going, instead of just going into the base color, because this is a dark scene, you kind of need to put it into the emission as well. You need to drive the emission a little bit. If I turn this off, it becomes not very noticeable, and then you lose all the detail. So that's what the emission is doing. The other thing I have done is I have duplicated the area light that was lighting the scene. This one. And then in the object tab under light linking, I just linked it to the logo collection. What that does is it makes sure that the light just affects the things in the collection. That's what light linking does. So if I disable this, if I disable this, you will find that the logo all of a sudden is not as dark. The reason is I wanted the logo to be on the bright side, and I wanted to push the highlights on the logo a little bit. These highlights. Other than that, it's the same area light. I think the brightness is cranked up a little bit to get those highlights. Yeah, it is 300 instead of, I think, 100. Yeah. Okay, that is about it for this file. Oh, and I rendered these in 4K instead of 1080p because I was not going to render the animation of this because that's unnecessary. The point of these is to act as social media banners. So you don't really need the animation for this. Okay, that is a look at this file. I will come back with the next file, the second file, and we'll take a look at that. That's a little bit more complicated than this one is, although the basics are still the same. Okay, so this is the second file, and it looks like this. This is basically just two layers. One is a floor plane, the other is a tiled, beveled cube that acts as the tiles. That has PBR materials applied to it. So let's take a look at the tiles first. If I go out here and go underneath, these are the tiles. This is just a single cube that has been flattened with the scale applied, beveled, and then arrayed. That's all this is. That is all this is. If I look at this, you will find that it's arrayed once in the X direction and arrayed again in the Y direction. This is actually from a different file that I made that I will take a look at some point on my channel. But I just imported this from that file, so I didn't have to redo too many things about it. These are the textures. I'm not using the displacement because I don't need to. What I am doing, however, is I am adjusting the base color, making it darker because the default looks far too bright. If I look at the camera, if I mute this, that is too bright for dark mode. That is a little better. The other thing is this thing, which you don't really notice much unless you look at these highlights here. What this is doing is that it is subtracting a value from the roughness map, and you can do this many different ways. I chose to subtract the value. What this basically does is that it reduces the roughness and it makes it more reflective. And I think I changed this a little bit. I don't think I changed this very much from the other file that I imported this from. But basically, I guess if I go here, you will notice that there's a very subtle reflection here. And if I mute this, it is still there, but it's not, it's a lot more rough. I think it is more noticeable with this thing, these accent lights. It's a little bit more noticeable with the accent lights. But yeah, basically I wanted there to be some reflection. The rest of it is the same. I just duplicated. This is basically a duplicated version of the previous file. So I took the original file, duplicated it, made it dark mode. And then I duplicated that file, imported these assets, and then made it into this thing, into this different file. And then what you do, this is also rendered in 4K. Okay, this is the really important bit. Glad I remembered. This is the same camera. I did not change the camera angle at all. I did not touch anything else. These have to look exactly the same for the logos and the perspective to be exactly the same and overlap in a way that you can have a seamless transition between the two files, between the two results in Affinity. Okay, so in Affinity, I have these layers. All I did is I imported this, then I imported this, added some contrast, brightness contrast to both of them, just to accentuate the differences between the light and the dark. And I just added a gradient mask. The gradient mask, for it to work right, for this to look right, and for it to sell the concept well, it is extremely important that the lighting values and the camera do not change in the blend files between the two shots, because the S has to look exactly the same in both of these. So if I remove this, you will notice that the S looks pretty much exactly the same, and that is what sells the concept that the S is sitting on an overlap between these two worlds, right? And that is basically what I wanted for the concept, that the grid is evolving into an environment. That is what this idea is. Okay, the other thing is that the mask is basically a gradient mask that is aligned to these leading lines, these perspective lines. It has to be aligned to this, otherwise it's going to look a little odd. I think this makes it look a lot more natural. The other thing that I forgot to mention, that I will quickly mention, is in Blender, in either of the files, I removed the environment texture, the HDRI that was there, and I just replaced it with just the default. That's the only other thing, that's the only other change I have made. All right, I guess I didn't show you how these emission thingies work. It's basically a couple of Voronoi textures. One is squares, the other is circles, which are combined into circles which are offset by this vector add into the vector, and then you combine them, and then you take this kind of a noise pattern and you multiply the noise pattern with it to get this kind of modulated grid pattern, which then gets multiplied by some factor in order to get values higher than 1. And then this multiply node exists solely to drive the animation. This is basically just if I just look at this, it's just noise. It's just noise that has the frame range restricted, blended in, blended out. I guess that doesn't really matter for this thing, for the animation that I did on the other file that I imported this from. That was a seamlessly looping animation. That's what the noise is for. But I'm just taking the first frame. Like just ignore this. You don't need this if you just want to make a still render. That is basically it. The accents, the TLDR is that the accents is just a modulated grid modulated by a noise, this noise on a large enough scale, or small enough scale, I suppose, that looks large. Anyway, that is about it. I'm going to put up the image, the final image again. I think this looks much nicer than the light mode image that I had. It looks a lot more interesting. It looks like it has a lot more direction to it. It looks like it belongs in a portfolio, basically. And that is why I made this render. It's a combination of two things taken into Affinity and slapped together using a gradient mask. That's about it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more breakdown videos like this. The other ones are a little bit more in-depth. The other ones also have face cam in them. I was not feeling like using a face cam. I did not feel like dressing up, so on and so forth. It's also the evening, so the lighting is not there's not much natural light here. It's not going to look as nice. So all things considered, I decided to drop the face cam and just record the video because the content is far more important than the camera, the face cam. Okay. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. So on and so forth. You know the drill. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later. Goodbye.